In this episode, it was a huge pleasure to have a conversation with Steve Mortimer, Senior Manager with BT Business. Steve's got great experience working for mid-sized systems integrators as well as huge companies such as BT. And one of our conversation points was about how the sales manager role is different in different sized organisations. We touched on many topics, one of which is the circle of concern, of influence and control, which is a key tool for surviving and thriving, maybe in all aspects of life, but especially inside big, multifaceted organisations. Another issue that Steve raised was how, as a sales manager, it's important to continue developing your own personal market and solutions knowledge, as well as your sales skills, so that you can add increasing value internally and also directly with customers. Getting that balance right is a dilemma for all sales managers. Enjoy. So, Steve, thanks ever so much for finding the time to come on the podcast. I know you're just back from a business trip, but listen, if we can kick off, standard question to start with. Can you just explain kind of how you got into sales management in the first place?
Yeah, no problem. So it's great to be here, Steve, first and foremost. So thank you for having me. In terms of my journey, it's been, I suppose, probably quite a stereotypical journey that a lot of sales managers have probably had. So around 20 years ago, I graduated university and went into my first sales job, which was kind of a mixture of cold calling and desk-based account management, supporting some of the field guys. Did that for a few years and then kind of progressed my way up through the organisation that I was at the time, into being a field sales account manager myself. Again, kind of did that for a number of years, kind of honed my skills and my expertise and experience to being then a kind of more senior account director, to a point where I suppose we had a lot of change in the business, as is typical in the industry, I think, and various sales managers at the time came and went. I had naturally, by that time, got myself into a position where I was almost the go-to person, I think, within the team for queries, questions, what should I do in this scenario sort of thing within the team. And then probably seven or 8 years ago now, the operations director at the time rang me up and kind of said, Steve, would you want to actually manage the team? Which almost without hesitation, and perhaps I should have hesitated a little bit more at the time, but without hesitation, I accepted that offer. It was the next logical step for me, although it came, if I'm honest, probably a couple of years early to what I suppose my own personal plan or expectation was. So yeah, that I kind of was flung into managing the team that I was within for a number of years. So that I suppose came with its own challenges that we might touch on a little bit later.
Yeah, we might want to do that. And it is, as you say, I mean, it's very common. It's what happened to me as well. But you get phoned up one day, would you like the role? And well, you said without hesitation. So what is it that kind of attracted you to the role? Is it more money? Probably not. What is it?
I think for a lot of people that kind of find themselves in a sale role, that it's that natural next progression. So it had already been at the back of my mind that was probably what I wanted to do in the future. But like I said, it probably came a little bit earlier in kind of my own expectations. I was pretty lucky really in over my, I don't know what it was, 8, 9, 10 years of kind of field sales, in that I personally had some really good and strong mentors throughout that time, who I suppose instilled in me all the right behaviours that I should be doing. And I was also well, and still am, quite a studious person in terms of I spend a lot of time learning and developing my own skills, but also learning a lot about the industry and the technology so that I can continue to be relevant and I suppose futuristic in terms of my thoughts and opinions within, when I'm sat in front of the customers that I work with. And I suppose those attributes naturally led itself to leading a team so that I could instill those behaviors and those attributes and I suppose that thought leadership into the team that I did manage then and the teams that I've managed since.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. When you say instill these things, you had mentors that helped you. You're trying to help other people now, but that leads nicely to. I mean, my second standard question is: what, in your experience, what are the key attributes or characteristics that go into making a really successful sales manager?
So there's a few, right? I suppose there's one main industry leadership myth that I would like to almost call out and dispel to a certain point as well. So I was always told and taught that you almost couldn't be a nice guy. You couldn't be friends with people that you manage. And in my experience, that doesn't have to be the case. Yes, I suppose that there's always a line that you have to consider in terms of you are working for an organization or for a business, and therefore you've got to uphold, whatever you're being asked to do. But at the same time, my opinion is that honesty, integrity, I suppose, and leading by example are some of the key attributes of leading a successful team on the basis that I suppose there's different types of managers. I'm very much a hearts and minds type of person in terms of I want all of, my direct reports to feel like they can come to me with anything. They can be their true self. They can be unapologetically themselves, actually. And, I'm there really to work for them, not the other way round. They don't work for me. I kind of work for them. And that was one of the key skills that I had to learn changing roles from being an individual contributor to a sales manager and sales director. The other key attribute, and I suppose a bit of a call out for anybody that is watching this in terms of, thinking about making that transition, is never ever lose that hunger and that skill set that you had as an individual contributor. So I kind of openly say to my team and to my customers and to other people within the business that I now work for, I am still a sales guy at heart.
Right.
That's what I'm good at. It's what I enjoy doing. And although now I find myself in a position of managing people, I still get out in front of customers and meet with customers and build relationships and do all the things I was doing as an individual contributor, but now as a sales manager as well.
Right. Okay. We'll come back to that. I think that's great personally. But there's a whole heap of things that came out of that. So you said, you would, the myth was that as a manager you can't be a nice guy. Now I get that. That is a myth. But have you, I was going to say suffered from, but experienced people who are not nice and think that that's the way to manage? Because I know there's people that are around, but increasingly I think that's, they're a dying breed. I don't know what your experience is there, Steve.
I think times have changed a lot from, I suppose, the early 2000s when I first got into sales. So like I said, I was very lucky to have some really good people around me early on in my career, and actually kind of in the mid stage of my career as well. But as you rightly allude to, I've also seen, I suppose, the good, the bad, and the ugly as to what that looks like as well. So I suppose you always, as much as you learn from the good, it's also really important to learn from the bad in any walk of life. So one of the key promises I did make myself when I first took the position to manage a team was to never be that guy, because I'd had sales managers, that hadn't been particularly helpful, hadn't really been particularly interested in kind of me as a person and what I was doing and what I wanted to achieve, hadn't, I suppose, helped out in terms of with that customer side of things. And they'd been very much kind of, I call it a spreadsheet manager. So that hands-on experience, I think, no matter how experienced or knowledgeable you think you are, there's always things that you can learn from other people when kind of sat in front of customers and trying to build relationships and ultimately sell things to your customers. So learn from the bad as well as the good, and take the learnings from both, and then mold your own style and kind of be unapologetically yourself in terms of your own personality and your own style, because personality, I think, is integral to building that honesty and integrity with both people you work for and your customers.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people talk now about being authentic as a manager, which I think is, another way of saying that. You also said, the myth is you can't be friends with the people in the team. One of the things I've often discussed with managers is, and you talked about, there is a line, because as much as you want to be one of the team, you are in a slightly different position. So, from your perspective, are you able to be one of the team, or how does that work for you?
I think I can be 90% kind of part of the team. I'm sure there's the odd comment or the odd, Teams message or WhatsApp message where people in the team might not completely agree with everything I'm saying. Okay. But do you know what? That's part of being a grown up in a professional environment as well, in terms of understanding that you are allowed to disagree. People are allowed to have different opinions. And just because I think something's right doesn't necessarily mean that they think it's right. And actually, if I kind of just touch really quickly back on my own transition, that was one of the key learnings that I had to take, because the first 6 to 9 months of managing a team, I was probably running round being, again, what I call a busy idiot, in terms of I was trying to impart my ways and my way of doing things on the team. So they were probably a little bit unlucky in that first 6-9 months, because I was still learning how to be a sales manager, right? And I had to learn very quickly that although my ways and my thought processes had resulted in a lot of success, everybody is an individual. They've all got their own motivations and their own goals, and they've also all got their own ways of kind of going about their business and building relationships and selling to customers. So my role, therefore, is to be part of the team as much as I possibly can be, and be friends with them and understand them as people and help them achieve their goals, and so that they develop. But it's also to, I suppose, impart my knowledge and experience, but then get out of their way and remove any roadblocks that they have within the business to go and do things their way. So I think you can be like 90% part of the team. But I suppose there is still a slight line. But going back to the, can you be a nice guy and can you be friends with people? In my opinion, absolutely yes.
Yeah. And I obviously concur with that. The majority of people that we get on the podcast, I think, would concur with that as well. Yeah, and the whole concept of servant leadership, where you said your job is to help them, not for them to help you. Oh, okay.
use
And
then.
I love that phrase, just get out of the way. I think we all forget that sometimes, that if you've got good people, if you've given them the tools, they've had the training, yeah, sometimes you just want to get out of the way. Uh, okay. And
Absolutely.
I was also reminded there when you talked about not everybody's going to agree with you. Yeah. Um, but who was it? One of my guests came up with, there will be a WhatsApp group in the team where you're excluded. And yes, and that's difficult emotionally sometimes, particularly if you've been part of that team, and then all of a sudden you think, yeah, no, of course they've got a WhatsApp group without me, but it's difficult emotionally, isn't it?
I mean, I
Yeah,
suppose it comes down to how seriously do you want to take yourself as an individual. I mean, in many ways, because I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly during the years, I'd almost be worried if there wasn't a WhatsApp group like that, because
right.
people need, and I was one of those people, right, for so many years, people need an environment to vent sometimes with their fellow teammates and colleagues, and share. Sometimes you can get some great ideas come in those kind of groups as well, that then kind of feed their way back up into the actual team environment, because people naturally will say, I really don't agree with what Steve just said. I think it should be this, and this. And then
Yeah,
if other people start agreeing with that kind of in a closed, safe environment, somebody then can kind of bring it back
yeah,
into the team, and that's
yeah,
part of that integrity, openness, and honesty, and making people feel like, even though there's that group kind of behind closed doors, if that
yeah.
group then generate ideas or new ways of thinking about something, me as a leader, I need them and want them to feel like they can then feed that as a closed loop
Right.
back into me.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And I'm not right on everything. Neither is any other sales leader out there.
Well, no, absolutely. And the fact that I mean, it's like getting out of the way. Sometimes even, you're clearly not this kind of domineering type of manager, but I guess, if you're in the room just through respect, people may not come up with ideas or not voice those ideas. So again, just accepting that sometimes it's better to let them get on with it. Um, uh,
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. You talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we touched on a couple of things. Normally on the podcast, I focus on what are the good characteristics. Could you give me any more around what you see as really bad practices, maybe historically, but these things happen today.
I suppose a trend at the moment, because of AI and big data analytics,
Yeah,
is to, when you're in a mess from a sales organization perspective, is to data your way out of it.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
And I'm a big believer in you've got to sell your way out of tough times, and you've got to double down and focus on building long-term, strategic, mutually beneficial relationships with
Yeah,
customers. That's how, in the medium long term, you get over challenges. Whereas I think a few different organisations that I've been in the last probably 4 or 5 years, when things are getting a bit tough, I think some of the narrative is right. We're going to look at all the data in absolutely minute detail, and hopefully by spending all the time and effort looking at all the data, we will somehow come out the other side of it with greater pipeline and greater
yeah,
opportunities and things like that. And I mean, data for me should be used as an insight,
right.
both to pick out what the good behaviors look like, and if you correlate the data with the top performers, what does that look like, to give sales leadership that feeling and that insight as to what those people are doing, and
Yeah,
the same the other way for maybe people that are struggling a little bit, and then maybe look at their data, and are they spending the time on all of the right behaviors, that they should be doing to kind of drive pipeline and drive growth. And I think sometimes that message in terms of what you're trying to get out of the data can get a bit lost. And I think that has all kinds of, I suppose, negative effects sometimes on a sales organization, because I talk about the fluffy grey area of sales, and data's very black and white. There's a whole band of grey in sales, and that's kind of some of the stuff that you can't measure with data in terms of how are your relationships, how are your employees under my leadership feeling, how engaged are they? Are they taking the right messages and the right conversations to their customers? Are they getting deeper and wider within that customer base? You can't really measure that with data. So I would say just incredible focus on data, and using that as the yardstick is a real challenge, I think.
Yeah, that's a really interesting conversation. I've had a lot of talks with people where we talk about the difference between being data driven and being data informed. And we know, in some other professions, in the medical profession, they're data informed, not data driven. You have to interpret, you have to put things in context. There's so many, you talk about the fluffy grey areas, relationships, or the subjective feelings that go into whether people choose to trust you and do business with you as customers, but also as members of the team. That's really interesting. And you said earlier, you can't be a sales manager just operating behind a spreadsheet. But I guess, and particularly in an organization like a huge telco, where there is lots of data, there's been lots of investment, there's lots of people looking at that data, and people who maybe not necessarily have experienced what it's like to sit in front of a customer and look in the whites of their eyes and trying to figure out, can I trust you or not? But so there's lots of pressure on sales managers to react to data. Is that something that, how do you must have that pressure? You're getting lots of comments from people that I've seen this in the pipeline. How do you as a manager cope with that and work with it?
I suppose in a large organization, one of the biggest challenges you have as a sales manager, sales director, in terms of in that middle layer of management, is that you get a lot of directives from above, and then you also have got a lot of mandates and things to worry about from below, both from your actual team and your actual people, but also obviously customers where you have direct relationships. And then it's probably compounded by certainly the organization I work for at the moment. There are teams of people that do all the other aspects that support the sales organization, whereas in organizations where I've worked previously, the onus is much more on the sales community to drive, I suppose, some of the marketing messages and the sales messages, and even into some of the solutioning of whatever technology it is that you're selling to solve a customer problem.
Yes.
And of course, in a large organization where you've got different teams of people whose job it is to do that for you and help you, there is sometimes disparity between what they're seeing in the market and the reports that they get from some of the thought leadership sort of organizations, the likes of Gartner and Forrester, to actually when you're sat seeing, as you said, the whites of the eyes of your customers, and actually what keeps them up at night and what their key challenges are. So managing that whole ecosystem can be a real challenge in terms of getting to a point where all sides are happy that you've got a strategy or an outcome that ticks the agenda boxes, if you like, of all of those different business units, if that made sense.
Yeah. And so this is an area I really want to explore a little bit more with you, Steve, because you
Yeah, no
have
worries.
experience of different sized organizations, and I guess the challenges are different. In your experience, how do you what's your overall strategy in terms of the ecosystem and how you manage it? Because I know some people just say, right, I've got my team of people, I'll do what my boss says, I'll try and ignore everybody else, but I will get all this stuff thrown at me. There are some managers who see their role as just protecting the team, taking everything and just getting everything filtered through them. That's almost impossible these days. So how is it for you, in this big, well-respected, complex organization?
So there's a couple of things. I always market myself, both internally and externally, as a challenger by nature.
Okay.
So I like to challenge the status quo.
Right.
And I know there's different types of people from that regard, as you just said, in terms of some people would rather just kind of go with the flow. Some people protect their own team.
Yeah.
Me, I kind of see my role as greater than just managing my team, rightly or wrongly. Some people might say, "Get back in your box, Steve. Your role is to manage the team." But what gets me out of bed in the morning is I want to make things better for my team and my customers. And the only
Right.
way that I can make things better is to consistently challenge the status quo. And that comes down to communication, I think, more than anything. So
Okay.
um, I have my ideas and my thinking patterns about what's important based on experience with customers. Other departments, other business units have their opinions, and that's fine. And going back to what I said earlier, sometimes that can cause a bit of a heated debate, but that's where everybody needs to be grown up enough, professional enough to just agree that sometimes you can have different viewpoints on the same subject, but actually
Yeah.
communicating and talking about it is probably the most important thing, because even if an area of my business takes on board 10% of what I'm saying, that's still moved the dial 10%
Yeah.
in what I deem to be the right direction for me and my team
Yeah.
and my customers. So keeping those lines of communication with all the different departments is absolutely key, but also providing clarity to all those different people or different business units about why it is that you're challenging, what it is that you want to get to. And I suppose if you think about the circle of control and the circle of influence, what are the things that I can control within my role and what are the things that I can influence?
Yeah.
And if there's something that falls outside of that I can't control and I can't influence, well, then
Yeah.
that's the kind of stuff in a large organization that you just have to take on the chin, be professional and kind of get on with it.
Yeah. It strikes me that circle of influence, looking at what you can control and what you can't, what you can influence, um, is particularly important for people moving from maybe a smaller organization where they can go and have a conversation with the CEO and get things changed tomorrow.
Yeah.
But it can be frustrating then to go to, a bigger organization. So yeah, that strikes me as really, really key. And you said you market yourself as challenger. So the kind of organization that you're in today, or any organization, do you believe in the whole concept of personal branding and being very conscious of how you're seen in the organization? And is that important? And how does that compare with kind of playing politics and stuff, which I always think
Oh,
is a
it's
negative patient. Where do you draw that line?
there's a loaded question. So I think to start off by answering that, personal branding, I think, is really important.
Right.
A wise man once told me to invest in my network like I would into customers.
Yeah,
So one of my key strengths actually within the industry is that I do have a wide and quite vast network of people that I can call upon if I need to, that can introduce me to new people, that can kind of just help out, and that I can engage with in all kinds of different scenarios. So that's my external network. My internal network is something that when I moved organizations a couple of years ago, I almost had to start from scratch because I was new into the organization. Most people didn't kind of have a clue who I was. And again, that was one of my real strong points in my previous organization because I'd had quite a long tenure there. Everybody knew me, everybody kind of knew who my wife was and all that kind of stuff. So that was a real challenge. But I think in a couple of years within such a large organization, I think I've been relatively successful at building that personal brand. And that personal brand, going back to the challenger statement, I think when you're in a large organization, the status quo, if you like, is a real big challenge because it's difficult to move things on to pace.
Yeah.
So I suppose my brand since I've been within the organization now is that I will say my piece, but it's always done, or at least I hope people think it's always done in a constructive manner based on the kind of skill and experience and learnings that I've had, because I do value myself and my team in terms of what we talk about and how we try and change the conversation with customers in terms of creating value, building thought leadership, and really, I want to be the one within my team and within my kind of inner circle to be the one that's bringing ideas to the table, not just relying on everybody else to kind of help us. Let's help ourselves. Let's be thought leaders. Let's be a student of the industry within which we work, and let's have an opinion on things.
So what do you actually do to build that personal brand internally? Is it just a case of acting the way you talk, being a thought leader, putting the effort in, getting yourself educated, being honest, being adult in your is it just that behavior, or are other things? Because I know when we talk about personal brand with the external network, there's lots of tools and stuff we can use. Are there things you do internally, or is it just behaving that way?
It's consistent behavior, I think, is the key thing. But I suppose that there are a couple of pointers that I can share. So there are, I suppose, again, a lot of sales managers, sales directors that sometimes don't get themselves involved in maybe some of the day-to-day activities that go on in the business when there are, I don't know, like product solution, road shows, training sessions or sales enablement sessions on a particular technology or from a particular vendor. Maybe I still, and I suppose it comes back to me still being a sales guy at heart, I still attend as many of those sessions as I possibly can for all kinds of reasons. Some is that I can still take learnings from those sessions. Secondly, I always need to be up to date with the latest technology and the latest trends because it's changing all of the time. And then thirdly, because using my experience and kind of time within the industry, if there are certain elements that are being discussed in those types of sessions with a wider sales community, for example, I can challenge and feed back on some of those areas that can maybe then be taken away after those kinds of sessions to be revisited, for example, or maybe just change the messaging slightly in a certain area. And I think that's incredibly useful. And everybody that are in those sessions will see that behavior and they'll see that kind of, I suppose, opinion and thought leadership in those areas.
So those events, different types of them, they're kind of the platform for you to demonstrate the stuff we're talking about. Okay. And do you, so it's putting yourself out there, it's making sure that you do, go to these events, talk to the people. I guess I was talking to somebody a couple of days ago who talked around going to these events, and it's the white space. it's the 5 minutes over a coffee where you can introduce yourself to, I don't know, a product marketeer or something, and just make those connections, get those relationships going. But doing that means that you're taking time away from, spending time with customers, with your people. How do you balance that? Because there are people who just spend all their time on internal stuff and don't get in front of customers, and there's some people the other way around. I guess there's a balance there, is there, Steve? How do you work that out?
It's always a balance. There's one thing that I do know, and that is time every week is finite, and I think every salesperson would agree with that. But yeah, it comes down to, I suppose, what you want to achieve and what you see your role as. And as I spoke about earlier, I kind of see my role very much not just with my team. That's absolutely the most important part of my role.
Yeah.
But if we're going to continue to be successful in the market, and we're going to continue to push boundaries, both of technology and solutions and business outcomes with our customers, those kinds of sessions are equally as important, because if we're not kind of closing the feedback loop on all of those messages and all that information, and critically staying up to date with what the latest technology and messaging and challenges that our customers have, I always kind of use the phrase of, if you're going to sit in front of a CIO of a customer, what is it you're going to say? Because there's so many training courses and sales enablement things that I've done over the years that the general message is you need to get higher within your customer. You need to get to the CIO to be able to sell. Well, that's all well and good, as long as you've got something credible, useful, and valuable to say when you get there. Because there's also nothing worse than getting to that level and not having an opinion on something, not being able to create or add value, or not be able to solve some of their key problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's lots of research now that, I think it's still true. We need to get to those higher levels. And as a manager, you have the credibility to help get there. But once you're there, you can't ask them what their challenges are. It's table stakes is that what the generic challenges are. But I was looking at some research. It was more around CEOs, but what they value is an opinion, a point of view. Whether it's right or wrong, they don't want to just talk about my challenges. They want to hear what you have to say, and done in an adult way, that it's an informed opinion, because that adds value to them. Okay, so this role is very multifaceted. You're looking after the team. You are almost an ambassador with senior execs. You're an ambassador back into the rest of the organization. You're trying to change the rest of the organization. So as a manager kind of in the middle there, you are a little bit squeezed from all sides, I guess. And that's, I guess, is the joy as well as sometimes the frustration, I would imagine.
Yeah, it can be a challenge, and it's actually something that I'm still in the process of learning, if I'm completely honest, especially that managing upwards. That's certainly something in I suppose the last couple of years that I take as kind of personal growth and reflection, in terms of I've not been particularly great at managing upwards sometimes.
Right.
I suppose because maybe naively, or maybe having worked in smaller organisations where you are, I suppose, more visible, and the day-to-day work that you are doing is seen. In a larger organisation, I think I've learned that you can't just expect people above you to know what it is that you're doing and where you're developing and where you're growing, because the organisation is just so large and so vast. So that communication, particularly upwards, and managing upwards is certainly something that I've had to get a little bit better at over the last few years. And if I'm honest, I've probably still got some some way to go.
That's probably true for everybody. And it's very natural. And I'm thinking about new sales managers. The immediate issue is normally, how do I manage the team? How do I get on top of the forecast? How do I help individuals? I need to recruit people. I need to motivate people, retain people, let people go, whatever it is. So that's the immediate thing for the first few years, often in a sales management career. But then as you blossom out and you add value to the rest of the organization, particularly if you're a challenger, that's a whole new set of skills to learn. What's your view, Steve?
Great.
So you made the move into management when you were with a smaller organization, and kind of thrown into it.
Yeah.
I guess there are people getting, I was going to say promoted, but moved into management in your current organization where probably they have a lot more support around them, more training and, processes and stuff. From your perspective, if you are a senior salesperson, anywhere, do you think it's better to try and make that move in a smaller company, or should you try and get, everything that's on offer from the bigger companies to make that move?
Well, that's a difficult question.
A lot of people don't have the choice, but we are where we are. But if you had to choose, what would you say?
I mean, I can only reflect, I suppose, on what's happened with me and my trajectory. So looking back, it probably was a good thing and set me up better that I made that initial, I suppose, jump in a bit of a smaller organization.
Right.
So that I probably had a little bit more leeway to kind of find my feet and figure out myself what it was all about and what I needed to do. Because like I alluded to earlier on in the session, it probably took me 6 to 9 months to just get my head around what I was actually doing and what I'd done in that period that I probably shouldn't have done and what I needed to change. Whereas in a larger organization, I suppose, again, there's pros and cons. There's a lot more people around you maybe to support you, but with a larger organization probably brings a few more kind of challenges, particularly I suppose internally and then what's expected of you from an external perspective as well. So I'm not sure there's a right answer to that question, but I think you're probably right. I think most people probably won't have a choice. But I would always say kind of use the environment that you're in to get the best outcome. So in a larger organization, you're going to have more support around you. So use leverage and don't be scared to ask questions and ask for help in those organizations. In a smaller organization, you maybe haven't got as many people and resources to support you, but you've probably got a bit more leeway and a little bit more autonomy to trial and error a few things, I suppose.
And one of the things that struck me about what you said earlier was you talked about the people that were mentoring you, gave you a lot of support, and it's that's probably as important as the company. It's finding those small number of people who you can have a real good mentoring type relationship with.
1,000,000%. And sometimes that was an arm around the shoulder, and sometimes it was a proverbial kick up the backside. So I think everybody needs them every now and then.
Absolutely. Okay. We've covered a lot of ground. And I've got a couple of more questions for you. But if you were to summarize, kind of, what are the 2, 3, 4 things, top tips you would give to a new sales manager? What would they be?
Number one is definitely continue what you're passionate about. So for me, I always loved the actual selling part of being in sales. What got me out of bed in the morning was not necessarily the money or the commission. It was more, I really always enjoyed going and seeing different businesses and learning about their businesses, and then retrospectively kind of working back the things within my kit bag that I could use to help them solve some of their key challenges. So be passionate about and continue to develop and use the skills that I suppose have got you to a position where people are either talking about you being promoted to being a sales manager, or if you move role into a sales manager position, carry on doing what you're good at. I think secondly is be a student of the industry. And again, that's a passion of mine, right? Or it's become a passion over 20 years, in terms of this industry has given me a very good life and a good lifestyle for my family. The least I can do is be, I suppose, the most valuable part within that industry that I can be. So still to this day, and I actually mentor and coach a few people within the business I'm at the moment. And I've imparted this on them as a key learning as well. I still to this day, every morning, the first 10, 15 minutes of my day is reading something within the industry, whether it's industry news, whether it's some kind of new white paper, whether it be on quantum computing or humanoid robots, or, you know, whatever it may be. I'm still learning all the time, because you never know when you're sat in front of a customer and either you need something interesting to talk about, or they throw a curveball at you, or whatever it may be. We need to kind of stay at the forefront of developments in the market. And the only way that we can do that is by being students of the industry. The last one really is, I suppose, looking at the competitive side of sales and sales management. Carry on that hunger and that acknowledgement that I always say again to people within the team and to people that I coach and mentor. Sales is a blood sport, in terms of there is only one winner. And you know, if you're an individual contributor particularly, you have to recognize that, you know, you're up against people like me, other people that have appeared on the podcast in the last 11 or 12 podcasts that you've done, some incredibly knowledgeable, skilled, experienced people. So that recognition, if you can embed that in your thought process, you have to stay ahead of the game. You have to be number one. You have to focus on building relationships with your customers, because ultimately that customer is only going to press the button on who comes first. There's unfortunately no prizes for second best in this industry.
That's Steve. That's really interesting. And you know, I have been very fortunate to have some great guests on the podcast. But you're mirroring what a lot of people are saying, which is, a lot of it is about character almost. Continuing your passion, being really curious, being hungry, being competitive. And clearly everybody's different, every role is different, but it comes down to a lot of those characteristics and being very conscious of those. That is excellent.
There's probably a fourth one I'd add. You've just almost reminded me of something. To just get rid of any aspiring sales managers, sales directors, whatever, anybody leading a team really. Get rid of any conscious or subconscious opinion or impression that you've got that being or leading a team, you need to have some sort of facade that isn't real, or that you should behave in a certain way. I think the best way to get people on board with you as an individual, and therefore to lead a team, is to be unapologetically yourself and have your own personality and bring that to the front, and be unapologetically yourself with your team and with customers. Because ultimately people are going to buy from people.
Well, and again, it is, we are much more sophisticated these days, but that is still the truth, unless there's that trust. And it's interesting because you say that, and at the same time, what I'm getting from you, Steve, is, keep developing yourself. Status quo in the organization, but also the individual is probably the biggest challenge that we have. You clearly are trying to develop your knowledge, but also your skills, your approach. But it's not a facade. It's, be really open about that.
Yeah, 1,000,000%.
Okay. Listen, let's take a very quick break, and then I've got 2 questions for you to kind of round this really fascinating discussion.
Bonus question.
Okay, Steve. So, we all learn from our mistakes, and hopefully we can learn from other people's mistakes. So if you're okay about it, could you just explain or describe, what you think has been the biggest mistake that you've made as a manager and what you learned from it?
The biggest mistake, and I've alluded to it a couple of times in the previous discussion, but the biggest mistake was absolutely thinking that when I moved from being an individual contributor to a sales manager, that I suppose my way was the best. My way had always, well, pretty much always been successful, obviously with a few ups and downs along the way, but I knew that my thought process and my way of selling and my way of engaging worked. And so the biggest mistake was assuming that I could, I suppose, control everything when I was managing a team of 7 or 8 people, all with their own relationships and their own customers and their own sales opportunities.
Yeah.
And as I said earlier, I spent probably 6 to 9 months running around thinking that I was doing the right thing and the best job I possibly could, but actually I was being a really busy idiot in terms of I was keeping myself incredibly busy. I was getting involved in everything, but I probably wasn't actually adding the value that I should have been, because I was trying to get involved in everything, because I could see, I suppose, deficiencies in what I thought would be the right process or the right things to do, and actually letting my new team and the people within that team go down their own path with their customer and their own way of building their kind of sales model and their sales process would have absolutely been the right thing to do. So I suppose that the learning from that was that you have to, as a manager of people, first and foremost, forget the sales side of it for a second. As a manager of people, you have to quickly understand the thought process and the strengths and weaknesses of the individuals within your team, and support where the weaknesses are, but where there are strengths, the opposite is also true. It's absolutely my job to get out of the way where there are different individuals in the team that are stronger than myself, or have maybe just got a different way of doing things. So I think it was Steve Jobs that said, surround yourself with people smarter than you. So I am by no means the smartest person in almost any room that I sit in. So enabling the people within my team to thrive and thrash out their own their own journey and their own sales processes where they're strong is an absolute key learning, and one that I've definitely taken into, I suppose, my management career over the last 3-4 years. So the only thing that I would say to that is my role as part of that is to really foster innovation and a different mindset. And that's what I can really impart onto a team environment.
Steve, that is really good. That phrase "busy idiot." Yeah, I remember myself going through that phase, and you do it with the best of intentions, but if you're not careful, you get into
Absolutely.
that downward spiral, and there's always things you can improve. For me, it was, when you said figuring out what your real added value is, and then focusing on that. And I think that's a really strong message for people. I love that Steve Jobs quote. The way I remember it was it said, he said, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. So, yeah, you want to,
In my case, a million
you want.
percent.
Okay, well, that's very profound. Just to finish off, then, what's your biggest triumph been? What are you most proud of achieving as a manager, and what did you learn from it?
So I suppose there's a number of, sales opportunities and things that you could point to, but, I always think that the actual wins are a result of all of the right behaviors that come before that. And even from
Yeah,
the wins, there are still things that you can learn from and that you probably would do different next time. So my biggest triumph is that there's been a couple of times now in my management career where I've been asked to, I suppose, take over a faltering team or a team that's been struggling, or maybe an area of the organization where it's just needed a completely different approach and a different
right.
strategy and a different mindset.
Yeah,
And I think what I've become very proficient at during the last 3 or 4 years is really taking a team environment and working with that team to fundamentally change the mindset of that team. And I always coin it, change the conversation. And I suppose that's where, from a personal perspective, in terms of my biggest triumph, that's where all of my learning experience and doing the job for 20 years has really played out and come to the fore, because
yeah,
fundamentally I cannot do that, or I wouldn't have been able to do that within a team environment if there was even a snippet of the people within the team thinking that I was talking a load of rubbish and I didn't really know what I was talking about, and I couldn't
yeah,
draw upon real kind of business or customer use cases to back up some of what I was saying. So
yeah,
that's probably my biggest triumph in terms of taking 2 or 3 different teams now and
yeah.
really kind of 180 them
Right, right.
from a faltering team, little by the way of the right behaviors and the right thought process and the right mindset, to really
Yeah,
transforming that to be a highly performing team with a kind of positive growth mindset and with a completely different outlook in terms of how we as an organization can engage with our
right.
customers.
That's fascinating. So what you're saying is, in those turnaround jobs, it's not, some great strategy or product. It really comes down to mindset, the conversations that we're having, the attitude that people have, and um and to do that as a manager, yeah, you need credibility, but you only get credibility if you're credible. And you
Yeah.
talked about knowing your stuff and all the research you do. But yeah, and again, that I think is something for.
Leading from the front as well, Steve. So, even if there are, that snippet of doubt within the team, if they
Yeah,
then see me attend a customer meeting alongside them and actually impart that kind of process, that mindset, that
yeah,
questioning, that challenger way of selling with their
yeah,
customers, that they see the outcome of that being a positive one,
yeah, yeah,
then that automatically, they then think, right, I will take that into my next customer session when Steve's not there to kind of
yeah,
help me, and to
yeah,
see that come to fruition, and then start
yeah,
seeing the different opportunities on the result of it, and see The number of contacts that we're speaking to within our customer organization, for example, kind of widen, and the number of contacts increase. Those are the key things for me in terms of, when you really think from an individual perspective, having an impact on a team in a positive fashion.
Yeah. And one phrase you use there, which for me goes to the heart of what management and leadership are about. It's not what they do when you're there, it's what they do when you're not there, as a result of some of the stuff that you've done. And that's where you're actually leading them, that they are doing things differently when you're not there. Steve, I'm just going to say thank you so much. I mean, there's so much here, a lot of stuff. I mean, I think for existing managers, we're focused on new managers, but a lot of stuff for people to think about, and a lot of it quite deep around your viewpoint, your outlook on life, your outlook on the job. So, amazing. Any final words of wisdom?
Well, final words of wisdom. I don't know. I think because I was always lucky to have really strong mentors, I would just encourage anybody listening to this that is in a relatively senior position to, if they're not already doing it, and I know that a lot do, by the way, but if they're not doing it, then look to coach, mentor some of the youngsters within your organization, and really actually treat that as a learning for yourself as well. So, I kind of feel really old saying it, but the youngsters coming into the business now, when I'm coaching and mentoring them, I'm genuinely also really learning things from them myself as well. So it kind of feels when they reach out or you reach out to them like it's they learn from you, but it's equally you can learn loads of new things from them as well. So
I 100% agree with that. Do that all the time. But that's again some more great advice. All right, Steve, thanks ever so much. Best of luck with the future. And thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure, Steve. Thanks for having me.
If you're an aspiring new or developing sales manager in complex business to business, or you know of someone who is, you may want to go to www.realsalesmanager.com to learn about our unique blend of training and coaching to help aspiring sales managers to decide if it's right for them and how to go about getting a job, to help new sales managers get as effective as possible, as quickly as possible, and to help developing sales managers with a personalised program to improve specific skills.